Nation Choice Award 100 Top Educators, Young Author of the Year 2020, Youth Leader Award और करमवीर चक्र अवार्ड जैसे कई अवार्ड से सम्मानित श्री यश तिवारी जी मेंटरशिप, पब्लिक स्पीकिंग और ट्रेनिंग के क्षेत्र में एक जाना माना नाम है। ग्लोबली रिनाउंड प्लेटफॉर्म टेडएक्स पर टेड टॉक और जोश टॉक्स डिलीवर कर चुके श्री यश तिवारी जी मेंटल हेल्थ एडवोकेट और मोटिवेशनल गाइड के रूप में भी प्रसिद्ध हैं। ब्लिस्टर्स ऑफ द बैटल, अ सेलिब्रेशन इन ट्रिब्यूलेशन और पैंडेमिक 2020 राइफ ऑफ द वायरस जैसी बेस्ट सेलर्स के ऑथर श्री यश तिवारी जी ने विजन और पैशन से अपनी अलग और खास पहचान बनाई है। देश विदेश में अपनी प्रतिभा से सभी को प्रभावित कर चुके श्री यश तिवारी जी इंटरनेशनल रिकॉर्ड होल्डर के अलावा इंटरनेशनल रेडियो होस्ट के तौर पर भी लोकप्रिय हैं। ग्लोबल यूथ मेंटर और सॉफ्ट स्किल ट्रेनर श्री यश तिवारी जी का बिजनेस पाठशाला में एक्सपर्ट के तौर पर हम स्वागत करते हैं।
Hi there, this is Yash Tiwari, a global youth mentor and international award-winning public speaker and a best-selling author of many books. In this session today, we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic with all of you, which is all about the startup stages and types of funding. Now, when we are talking about a startup, ideally the thing that comes to your mind would be something like coming up with a topic, initiating a startup, earning a lot through it, and generating a customer base out of it, which is a good plan. It is quite a good plan, but then in reality, for that plan to work out, there are so many processes and so many stages that are needed to be worked out, that are needed to be thought of, that are needed to be delved into. Stages of a startup itself that most of the aspiring entrepreneurs are not even aware of. Now, having an idea about how business works is one thing, but then having a clarity on the various stages of that business is a whole different discussion. And just like that, having a great idea is wonderful. As a matter of fact, in order for you to initiate a startup, having a great idea is important. But then again, the truth is, it might only be the very first stage of it. Because in reality, in order for you to even establish a startup, let alone turn it into a successful entity in the globalized and modernized world of today, you have to make sure that every single stage of startup is something that you have proper awareness of, and then secondly, has been properly worked out. You cannot just have a strong concept but not follow up on the other stages of a startup that require your due consideration and your efforts. Every single stage of a startup plays a huge role. Just like in a skeleton, every single bone has an importance. And even if a single bone is fractured, the entire skeleton's functionality is hampered by it. And exactly in the same manner, when we are talking about a startup, establishing a startup, kickstarting a startup, and initiating it in the global and modern world of today, every single stage of it plays a huge role in the overall functionality of the platform that you are willing to initiate. So now comes the question that what are these stages and how do you work on them? What are the various modules of funding? All of which we will be talking about in the session as we go ahead today. Now, firstly, let us have a quick introduction to the startup as a term itself, because it would not be wise for you to start learning about the various stages of something without having proper understanding of what it really means. You need to firstly begin with a thorough understanding and discussion on what a startup really refers to. When we are talking about a startup, we are not just talking about a generic company. We are not just talking about, coming up with an idea, then initiating it or commercializing it just for the sake of it. We are not even talking about an entity that you have created just for the sake of commercialization or just for the sake of monetary earnings or revenue. We are talking about something much bigger. We are talking about something that has a much greater impact. We are talking about an entity, a startup that can genuinely bring something to the world that has always been needed. Bring something to the consumers out there that they have always required. Bring something to the table that has always been anticipated, but it was only with this startup that you are able to bring it to fruition. The point over here to be noted is when we are talking about a startup, we are talking about something that looks similar to the traditional business models, but then it is drastically different as well. Mostly because it is coming out of, or it is originating out of, the modern world that we are living in right now. The modernized world that we are living in right now, that has given a whole different perception and a whole different definition to what startups mean in the present day, because startups are all about creative creations. Startups are all about innovation. Startups are all about solutions. And startups are all about the uniqueness. There can be so many competing platforms that already exist in the world, but it could be your startup with a unique idea, with a creatively unique business plan, with an intriguingly unique product or service that you are capable of offering to your customers that could stand out. But all of that hugely depends on how much you are valuing the true definition, the true gravity of what a startup refers to. Because, of course, in the session ahead, we are going to be talking so much about the various stages of the startup, how to work along those various stages, how to work everything out properly so that you are able to establish your startup properly in the modern world of today. But for all of that to be understood properly by you, you have to go on and think of what you consider your unique idea, your unique service to genuinely be like. How is it adding a value to the world or the market or the segment that you are targeting? And how can you really create an impact with the idea that you are initiating a startup with? So, when we discuss further on the same, let us have a quick discussion on what are the various stages of these startups as well. Like, how do we define them? How do we categorize them? How do we give a sequence to the various stages of a startup? Now, before we go on and talk about it all, there are things to be understood very clearly. First of them being, when we are talking about a startup, there are various stages which goes without saying, but then every startup is on its own unique journey. Every startup is on its own unique pathway in terms of what it requires or what are the specific stages of that particular startup. There are fundamentals, there always are fundamentals, but there are also individually unique requirements and needs and necessities that are going to be needed to be taken care of for the specific startup that you are coming up with or that you are conceptualizing. My point is, just because there are some fundamentals, you must also look beyond the fundamentals as well. You must also make sure that beyond everything that is considered as an essentiality for every startup, what are the requirements, the essentialities for your startup and individual? What are the additional requirements that you have? What are the additional things that you need to learn about when it comes to your startup? Which is why, as a matter of fact, we have this session designed for you as well, because you can have a basic understanding of what the fundamentals are of a startup, but what all we are discussing about over here, this is something that caters to your individual need. This is something that caters to your individual requirement with the startup that you are coming up with or that you have already initiated. So that personalization of the knowledge is absolutely essential, and that is what we believe in, based on which we have generated the content for the session today. And when we come to it, as you can see on the screen right now, there are various stages of the startup listed. Which brings me to the second important point that I wanted to raise before we go into the actual elaborate discussion of it all, which is about the fact that value plays a huge role when you are establishing a startup. Value, not just in terms of the commercial value of it, which can be one of the benchmarks, it can be one of the deciding factors for you. The value can also be defined in so many other terms. But my personal take on the term value itself is something which should come from your own self, which should come from your own mind, your own heart towards the topic, towards the idea, towards the concept, towards the startup that you have thought of. The kind of value that I'm talking about is more on the lines of valuing what you are establishing, valuing what you are working upon. See, it is a matter of fact that when you are working on something like a startup or a company or a brand, there are stages when you are not properly able to comprehend how to put the two and two together for the startup to work out. But what I want to encourage all of you about, especially when you see all of these stages listed on the screen right now, is the fact that value what you're working on. Value every single bit of the startup, every single bit of a concept, every single bit of a product or a service that you have started to work upon. Yes, constantly keep on evolving, constantly keep on innovating all that you're working on, but value the inspiration, the core philosophy with which you started working. If your core philosophy while starting your startup was to bring a positive impact on the world, then maintain that philosophy. Because at times, in the pragmatic and the practicalities of the world, the philosophies which are required for you to genuinely encourage yourself to carry forward with your platforms or ventures or initiatives are missed out on. And it should not be that way. Value the practicalities, such as you see on the screen right now, every single practical stage of a startup, and value your personal encouragement towards all that you're working on as well. Because, as a matter of fact, that encouragement is required from the very first stage itself, which is that of the ideation. The reason why I say it is important to value whatever you are coming up with or whatever you are working on is because of the first stage of the startup itself, ideation. Now, ideation is where you are basically coming up with a topic. You are coming up with an idea. You are coming up with an original concept. This original term that I've used, this keyword, originality, is essential. This is something that you cannot miss out on. You cannot say that your topic is partly original or your product is, partly authentic. It should not be that way. Of course, it can be inspired by so many other things, but in its core, it has to be something which you are bringing to the table, not something that you are copying for the sake of it. Improvement is something that, of course, you can look to, but then there has to be a degree of originality in whatever you are working on. So, when we're talking about the stage of ideation, this originality, this authenticity, and the value of authenticity as well as valuing your concepts matters a great deal, because it is the very initial phase of the startup. At this point, nobody is asking you to even have a full-fledged team as such, or have investors lined up in front of you, or have a huge funding. At this stage, you just have to basically think. You just have to conceptualize. You have to research. You have to collaborate with experts. You have to communicate with mentors. You have to physically go in the market and see what is required. You have to communicate with the people around you and see what they need. You have to figure out whatever line of product or line of services you are coming up with, what is innovative in whatever you are doing, or what can be done in a very innovative manner in whatever you are doing. If you are willing to start a clothing brand, check out as many clothing brands as you can to see what is it that you can do better, that you can innovate on. If you are, let's say, willing to open a sort of a food joint, figure out as many food joints and see what personally you can bring to the table that is different, that creates a sense of innovation, that is interestingly unique for the, let's say, the audiences out there, or the consumers out there, or the targeted expected customers out there. In this stage of ideation, you are basically looking at researching left and right, conceptualizing left and right, figuring out anything and everything that you can do to positively make not just your startup, but the specificity of the products, the services, the offerings of your startup interesting, unique, and genuinely needed for the audiences and the customers out there. So, this basically refers to the fact that when you are in the ideation stage, conceptualize ideas that actually solve a problem or that fulfill a need and necessity of the people out there, or that at least generate a sense of curiosity in their mind, which further, of course, can help you in expanding your business, your startups as well. After that comes the point of the minimum viable product, which is something that many of you might consider technical, but it is not that way. It is simply about considering and properly, thoroughly analyzing the viability of a product on a certain presumption for the market that you are willing to target, or the segment of the audience that you're willing to target. This is basically about researching the viability and the validity of a certain product which you are willing to commercialize in the market, or a service that you're willing to commercialize for the audiences. After that comes the point of the investment. Now, investment is where the funds are generated. Funds are needed, it goes without saying. Without funds, it is quite difficult to expand anything remotely in your startup, especially as a newcomer in the field of market or in the business world. You will have to expand on so many things, and if not expand, you will have to sustain things, you will have to retain things, you will have to retain the employees, you will have to retain the infrastructure, you will have to retain the technology, you have to expand it as well. You have to expand the technology, you have to expand the infrastructure, you have to expand the employees, you have to expand the product lines, the concepts, the business plans, and much more. But all of that hugely depends on how many resources you have to do it all. You need the resources to hire more people, you need the resources to develop greater technology, you need the resources to purchase more infrastructure for better working of your platform and your startup. All of that depends on how much funds you have, how much resources you have. So you need to think of and conceptualize the funding policies and the funding related ideas that you have in your mind in regards to where the funding will come from, how will you get the investors. So you have to figure out exactly how the funding of your startup will look like. You have to at least conceptualize how you think the funding can work out for your startup a little beforehand. Of course, as you go ahead with the process, slowly and gradually, you will be able to figure out more directions and more avenues from where the funding can positively be generated for your startup, investors, greater profit rates, and much more. But on a very initial level, having a generic idea in your mind about the 3 4 specific we can say avenues from where you are assured you will be able to get the required investments, it is needed. It is absolutely needed, especially on that very initial ideation stage when you're only conceptualizing what the product is going to be like. So in that stage, having an idea about where you can get the fundings from in the longer run gives you an edge in terms of the conceptualization as well, because it basically helps you in thinking that you are willing to and you will be able to generate a product of so and so capacity, because you will have the resources for it. You will eventually have the resources for it. So having a sense of clarity about the funding part of your startup helps you in generating concepts for products on a larger scale as well, because you are able to envision bigger. You know already that the funds will be there, so you will be able to envision how bigger the product line can be based on the same as well. And of course, as mentioned, the capital is required not just for the products but so many other things in a startup as well. So all of those things are benefited from the same too, all of which we are going to be discussing about as we go ahead in the session. Then comes the point of the product market fit. Now, product market fit is basically all about figuring out how your product or service or whatever you are basically offering through your startup really fits into the market that you are targeting, in order to think of what modulations are needed to be done, what modifications are needed to be done, what sort of flexibility is required in order to amend how the product or the services or the offerings of your startup are based on the requirement of the market and the consumers who are existing in that market that you are eventually willing to target and you are eventually willing to turn into your loyal customers. After that comes the point of go to market, which is all about the commercialization of the product itself, following which we have the point of growth and maturity. Now, growth and maturity are two distinctive terms, but they complement each other in the sense that growth is all about the expansion. Expansion can appear in so many ways. Expansion is not just the categorized expansion of the revenue that you are earning. The revenues can be one version of the expansion, like, from the last quarter, in this quarter your sales have hiked a lot, your sales have been off the charts. Basically, you have been earning greater and greater with every day passing by, so that is a sign of expansion in terms of the profits that you're earning. But their expansion in terms of a startup is needed to be across a diverse field of avenues. The expansion could be in terms of itself, let's say the team that you're working with. Are you able to expand your team or not, or do you need to expand your team or not? The employees, from 5 to having 25 employees, from 25 to having 250 employees someday soon. Let's say perhaps even the investors, having more and more investors towards the startup or the concept or the business that you have initiated. Even in terms of the infrastructure itself, you are growing. You are not just sticking to that one room office, but you are growing to even hundreds of rooms across the country and whatnot. Basically, having a vision about the growth of your platform is essential, because this growth is a practical stage in the field of startups and in the avenue of startups. Growth is a stage in the startup process itself, because eventually your goal is to grow your startup. If you're working in one territory and there is potential to target another territory as well, to have more franchisees of your business in so many other cities as well, that is a sign of growth. Exploring it further might require a bit of additional effort and investment, but it is definitely a sign of growth. So understanding that growth just beyond the profitability or the commercial digits is important, because the growth can appear in so many ways for a startup or a business, all of which should be valued as well. After which comes the point of maturity. Now, maturity is that avenue where you can perhaps call your startup a bit self actualized. You are aware of the fact that your startup has grown, it has expanded, it has become a monumental entity, and that is where the maturity comes into play. So, let us start discussing about all of these stages in a bit of detail as well. First of all, we have the ideation stage. Now, during the ideation stage, you have to begin with identifying your ideal customers. You begin the process by thoroughly researching who your ideal customers are going to be. Like, if you are coming up with the idea of starting a clothing brand, you know that you want to start a clothing brand. But for whom exactly are you going to do it? You cannot just say that you want to start a t-shirt brand without having even the slightest of idea that what kind of a demography or what kind of a territory are you primarily going to be focusing on. You need to figure that out, not just because it is something that gives you a sense of clarity, but it is something that even helps you in developing the product accordingly. The way in which you would develop the t-shirts for toddlers would be drastically different in comparison to how you will develop the t-shirts for the young adults or even older than that. So that sort of a clarity on who exactly is your ideal customer is not just a choice but a necessity for you. So begin with the process of identifying whom you want to target as your ideal customers. After that comes the point of finding what problem they are facing. Once you have realized who your ideal customers are, think of how you can give them a solution to a problem that they might or might not be aware of. Like, let's talk of the same example, the t-shirts. Let's say you are starting this business or this platform, or you are initiating a startup which is all about the t-shirts. A problem that the customers might be facing is that generally whenever the t-shirts they purchase from online platforms, hypothetically speaking, the fabric is not that good. Now you might be hitting on this problem, emphasizing on it, and providing the solution to them that your brand is going to be producing the t-shirts that are made with the best of fabrics in the most sustainable manner. So it not only solves a purpose, it not only serves a purpose and solves a huge concern that your customers might or might not have been aware of, but it also acts as a point of discussion. It becomes a point of brand image representation that you are not only starting something, you are solving a problem with the help of your startup. So I think that sort of clarity on why you are serving your customers with a specific product or service or whatever your offering might be gives you an edge as an aspiring entrepreneur to further push your startup ahead as well. Then comes the point of estimating its potential market. Because thinking of who your customers are going to be in a very generic term is one thing, but then deciding the specific segment of the market, like the territory or the specific demography or the specific regionality or anything with a sense of specificity to where you are going to be putting forward this product or where exactly you are going to be marketing this product is needed. And I'll tell you the reason for it very simply. Because beyond the classification, like the generic classification of whom all will this product be for, understanding where exactly is it going to be placed also helps you in the generation of the product accordingly. If you are creating a product for the rural regions, you will have to generate a product which appeals to the civilians in the rural region. If you are creating a product for the urban regions, you will have to create a product that is more appealing for the urban folks. The point to be noted is sometimes having clarity on the actual potential market where exactly the product can be really placed gives you an edge in understanding how the product should be generated as well, from the marketing strategy to the product and service itself. Then, of course, comes the point of creating a hypothetical solution to that problem in the form of a product or service, which you can think of as a prototype in the very initial stage. Like when we are talking about the ideation stage, it could just be a prototype. It could just be a basic sample that you're creating. You are testing it out in the market, but having that sense of clarity on what exactly is it going to be that you deliver as a solution to the problem of the people, of the customers, of your potential market is very much needed in this initial stage itself. Then comes the next point, which is about the MVP. The minimum viable product is the way you will test that hypothetical solution. The MVP's one and only objective is to try out how the market will receive your solution and make you go through the build, measure, learn cycle. Now, when you are talking about the MVP or the minimum viable product, this is basically the testing phase. This is the process where you are testing out the solution which you are assuring your prospective customers. If you are saying that, so and so is the issue with the fabric of the clothes that you generally wear, now your brand is going to present the clothes, similar clothes, but with a better fabric. Are you actually assured about that solution? Do you yourself have confidence on that fact or not? Or should I specifically say, in technical terms, do you have a confidence on the viability, the validity of the solution that you're presenting to your consumers? This is what the MVP, the minimum viable product, is all about. You're basically hypothetically testing out the viability of the product or the solution in terms of the product or service or any other offering that you are putting in front of the customers through your startup or you are expecting to. Now, this also gives you an edge in terms of figuring out that if a certain part of the solution or a certain part of the product or the service is not up to the mark or is not working in the initial phase itself, what can you do to improve upon it? What can you do to enhance it? What can you do to resolve the issue and basically act upon the feedback to improve the product itself? After which comes the point of the investment. A venture backed startup will go through the investment stage over and over again with different objectives each time. The most common rounds are pre seed, seed, Series A, Series B, and so forth. Now, when we are talking about investment, there are a few things that need to be considered. First one, very interestingly, as presented on the screen, we are talking about a startup going through the investment stage over and over again. Maybe you are able to generate a certain sum of investment in the initial phase, and then from that point onwards you are able to actually expand based on the profits that you're earning right away. But for most of the startups, it might not be the case. Investment could be a long term thing that you are depending upon from one cycle to another, and then so on and so forth. So it should not also be something which you feel overwhelmed about or anxious about. Rather, think of investors and investment as a positive force to support you, genuinely a positive force to guide you through the process and take you ahead with the resource related requirements that you have. Because you might actually have a wonderful topic, you might actually have a brilliant idea, you might actually have a great concept in your mind in terms of the products and the services and everything, but it is a fact that funding is required. Capital is needed for whatever sort of a product or service you're working upon and you wish to commercialize it on a large scale. That commercialization sometimes can be benefited entirely based on the investors that you are collaborating with, that you are signing on with in the initial phase of your startup itself. That could become the acceleration which is required to get your startup going and go ahead with the same. Now, investors or investment as a process itself, as it is mentioned, can have its own stages as well. There can be so many stages: this pre-seed, seed, series A, series B, and so forth, and various others as well, which simply refers to the fact that in terms of the investment as well, you cannot think of it as just a singular process or a very quick singular stage. The investment phase itself can have its so many phases and so many stages, all of which need to be thoroughly considered. The investors or the investment as a process itself must not be considered as a singular process. It can have, and as a matter of fact, it does have various stages and various phases, all of which benefit a platform to a great degree, but must be considered with thorough understanding. Because what happens is, funding or the capital generation for your startup, as integral as it is, it also requires for you to deliberately be very much focused on exactly from where you are getting the investments and how specifically you are utilizing it as well. Trust me when I say this, it is not just about generating the capital, it is about utilizing it in the right directions as well. If you are generating the capital for so and so requirements in regards to your platform, then utilize it only for that in a way that you are genuinely able to grow your platform. If infrastructure is what you require the investment for, conceptualize what are the things in terms of the infrastructure that you require an investment for. How definitely you will be able to utilize it or benefit from the same when you are getting a positive investment. If technology is something that you want to advance with your platform, then how specifically you require the technology to advance for your platform, what are the avenues where the technology will benefit your platform, and how exactly will the investment play a role in it, what kind of an investment is even required for it. Consider it all properly and thoroughly beforehand, rather than waiting for the time when the investment might suddenly be required. Think of things a little beforehand. But talking of which, as we go ahead in the discussion, you have the next point of the product market fit. Having PMF or the product market fit means being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market, which basically is all about having a product which genuinely fulfills the needs of your customers, or fulfills the requirements of your customers, or actually serves the purpose with which you started it. If you are starting, once again the same example, a t-shirt brand which promotes sustainable fashion, make sure you are standing on the same point, make sure you actually are acting upon the agenda with which you started that startup and with which you are promoting your products. The product really needs to be sustainably developed, and it also needs to be of all the great qualities with which the prototype has been thought of, has been conceptualized, and even the product has been marketed to the customers. So figuring out how well your product is fitting in the market based on the pointers that you have conceptualized and even developed the product on, this is essential, this is required, because it gives you an understanding in regards to what still needs to be worked upon. Having a good PMF is great, but in case you are struggling a bit with it, don't feel overwhelmed. Just try to figure out why is your product not properly fitting in the market. Think of a jigsaw puzzle. When you are seeing that there is, a few pieces left to be filled out in the puzzle, you pick up a piece, you try to fit it in a space. If it is not fitting, it doesn't mean that the jigsaw puzzle is wrong entirely. It simply means that you need to fit another piece over there. There is the space for some other piece to be fit exactly. So that sort of a mindset gives you an edge in terms of fitting your product in the market, or generating a product that would actually fit in the market as well. Rather than just calling it a day and saying that maybe your product is not made for the market, try to figure out why. Try to figure out what can be worked upon to improve the quality of it, or what it is delivering to the audiences or your customers, in order to increase the PMF of whatever sort of a product line or services you have conceptualized and have worked upon with your startup. After which, of course, comes the point of go to market. Find out the best tactics to convert as many people as possible from that potential market. Aim for a repeatable, scalable, and profitable revenue generation model. You are trying to commercialize a product with a strategy that would actually work. Now, this requires proper, let's say, understanding, of course, of whatever you are presenting to the market, but it would also require expertise from mentors, from people who have been in the game for a long time and can offer their insight to you, can guide you through the process. It can even require the legal understanding of the entire process of commercializing a certain product, such as the one which you are thinking of, which of course would vary from product to product. The legalities for a fooding store would vary drastically in comparison to the legalities of a clothing store. So these things, before going to the market, when you are commercializing a product, when you are about to commercialize a product rather, you need to think of properly and deliberately. You have to make a conscious effort to figure out what kind of a strategy would actually work well for the kind of product that you have thought of, rather than just on a generic terms. Because every product has its own requirement, and even every startup has its own requirement. But that strategy is what differentiates an adequate startup from a brilliant startup. And as we go further in this brilliant discussion, we have the next point, which is all about the growth. Now, growth is all about accelerating your successful sales formula and going from startup to scale up. Some strategies for that are acquiring competitors or complementary businesses and taking your company to other geographies, which is basically about expanding beyond the point of origin for your startup, wherever you originated with your startup, growing beyond that, growing further than that, thinking of what are the other avenues where your startup can further expand as well. Now, this is not just about the territorial expansion, by the way. The growth, as I mentioned, can look like so many other things. The growth of your employees, the growth of the revenue, the growth of, let's say, the capital, the growth of the infrastructure, the growth of technology, the growth of softwares, the growth of your product lines, the growth of your services, anything and everything that establishes that you are and your startup is on a higher pedestal than where it was when it was started, is what should be and can be considered as the stage of growth for your startup. So in the end, all that I want all of you to remember in terms of the various stages of the startup is the fact that every startup has its own unique requirements, but the fundamentals are what give a strong foundation to every startup that you can possibly think of, which is what we have tried to cover in today's session as well. So I hope that you got to learn something interesting, insightful, and fun in the discussion today. To learn more about the world of business, entrepreneurship, and also startups, check out our other sessions as well. And thank you so much for joining us in this session today.
बिजनेस आइडिया में हम रोज लेकर आते हैं आपके लिए बहुत से इंटरेस्टिंग बिजनेस आइडियाज। इसी सीरीज में हम आज आपके लिए लेकर आए हैं कुछ बेकरी इंडस्ट्री बिजनेस आइडियाज। तो आज का पहला बिजनेस आइडिया है रस्क। रस्क का नाम आप सबने तो सुना ही होगा। रस्क एक सूखा, कठोर, कुरकुरा और रेक्टेंगुलर आकार का ब्रेड होता है। दोनों तरफ से ब्रेड को बेक करने की वजह से ये कठोर हो जाता है। इसे टोस्ट के नाम से भी जानते हैं। ये रेडी टू ईट स्नैक होता है। इसे बनाने में मैदा, सूजी, दूध तथा यीस्ट इत्यादि का प्रयोग किया जाता है। यह सुबह के नाश्ते में चाय, कॉफी या दूध के साथ खूब पसंद किया जाता है। अगर आप टेस्टी टोस्ट को अपना बिजनेस बनाना चाहते हैं तो इसके रिक्वायरमेंट की डिटेल्स कुछ इस तरह से हैं। इसकी पर डे कैपेसिटी 3200 पैकेट्स की होती है। इसके सेटअप के लिए 2000 से 2500 स्क्वायर फीट का एरिया रिक्वायर्ड होता है, जहां आपके मशीन की कॉस्ट 28 से 30 लाख तक रहेगी। इसमें 20 से 22 किलोवाट तक इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का यूज होता है। रस्क मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में 12 से 15 लोगों की जरूरत होती है। 40 से 45 लाख की इन्वेस्टमेंट पर आप इस बिजनेस में 15 से 20% तक प्रॉफिट कमा सकते हैं। अब चलते हैं अपने दूसरे बिजनेस आइडिया की तरफ, जो है ब्रेड। एक ऐसा ब्रेकफास्ट जिसे सब प्रायोरिटी पर रखते हैं इसके डिफरेंट डिशेस के साथ। हम बात कर रहे हैं ब्रेड की। ब्रेड एक स्क्वायर शेप के आटे की बेक्ड, नरम, फूली और पतली स्लाइस होती है। ये हमारी भूख का एक अच्छा पूरक है। ये मैदा, सूजी, गेहूं के आटे, पानी, नमक के मिक्सचर से तैयार किया जाता है। इसमें फाइबर, प्रोटीन और न्यूट्रिएंट्स पाए जाते हैं। ये डिफरेंट वैरायटीज जैसे होल व्हीट ब्रेड, मल्टीग्रेन ब्रेड, लोफ ब्रेड और बन इत्यादि में मिलने की वजह से सभी की पसंदीदा होती है। इससे सैंडविच, पेस्ट्रीज एवं बर्गर इत्यादि फूड आइटम्स बनाए जाते हैं। अब जानते हैं आपके फेवरेट फूड की मैन्युफैक्चरिंग के बारे में कुछ बातें। ब्रेड मेकिंग बिजनेस अगर स्मॉल स्केल पर शुरू किया जाए तो सबसे पहले इसमें 600 से 800 स्क्वायर फीट एरिया की रिक्वायरमेंट होगी, जहां मशीन का कॉस्ट लगभग 5 से 8 लाख तक जाएगा। 3 किलोवाट की इलेक्ट्रिसिटी यूसेज के साथ इसमें 3 से 5 लोगों की मैन पावर रिक्वायर्ड होगी। इस बिजनेस में 20 से 25% तक लाभ प्राप्त करने के लिए 8 से 13 लाख तक का इन्वेस्टमेंट आपको करना होगा। अब बढ़ते हैं अपने अगले बिजनेस आइडिया की तरफ, जो है वेफर। वेफर बच्चों का हमेशा फेवरेट। ये एक मीठा, क्रिस्पी, मल्टी लेयर्ड पतला बिस्किट होता है। ये बहुत ही लाइट स्नैक होता है। वेफर को आटा, दूध, शक्कर और सोडा इत्यादि के मिश्रण से तैयार किया जाता है। इसमें वेजिटेबल फैट भी होता है। इसका यूज चॉकलेट, पेस्ट्री, आइसक्रीम्स, केक इत्यादि में किया जाता है। बात करें अगर वेफर के बिजनेस रिक्वायरमेंट्स की, इस बिजनेस की टोटल इन्वेस्टमेंट कॉस्ट 20 से 25 लाख तक रहती है। इसका सेटअप एरिया 1200 से 1500 स्क्वायर फीट तक होता है, जहां इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का यूसेज 15 से 18 किलोवाट तक होता है। 10 से 12 लोगों की मैन पावर के साथ इस वेफर के बिजनेस से आप 10 से 12% तक का प्रॉफिट मार्जिन गेन कर सकते हैं। आज का हमारा आखिरी बिजनेस आइडिया है जीरा बिस्किट्स। चाय के साथ जीरा बिस्किट्स एक अलग स्वाद और माहौल बनाते हैं। ये एक कुरकुरा, हल्का नमकीन, हल्का मीठा और भुना जीरा से परिपूर्ण पतला बिस्किट होता है। जीरा बिस्किट एक हेल्दी स्नैक माना जाता है क्योंकि जीरा डाइजेशन में काफी हेल्पफुल होता है। जीरा में एंटीऑक्सीडेंट गुण पाए जाते हैं। सबके मनपसंद जीरा बिस्किट के इंग्रेडिएंट्स की बात करें तो ये आटा, मैदा, बटर, भुना जीरा और दूध इत्यादि के मिश्रण से तैयार होते हैं। चलिए अब जानते हैं इस रेडी टू ईट स्नैक के बिजनेस के बारे में। ये एक स्मॉल स्केल बिजनेस होता है जिसके लिए 1000 से 2000 स्क्वायर फीट एरिया की जरूरत होती है। इसमें इलेक्ट्रिसिटी रिक्वायरमेंट लगभग 23 किलोवाट तक होती है। जीरा बिस्किट के बिजनेस से 20 से 25% तक प्रॉफिट कमाने के लिए 6 से 8 लोगों की मैन पावर के साथ 25 से 28 लाख तक इन्वेस्टमेंट करना होता है। तो ये थे हमारे आज के बिजनेस आइडियाज। हमें उम्मीद है कि आज के बिजनेस आइडियाज आपको पसंद आए होंगे। अब हम आपसे जुड़ेंगे जूम सेशन पर, जहां आप एक्सपर्ट से अपने सवाल पूछ सकते हैं। जूम सेशन का लिंक आपको यूट्यूब चैट बॉक्स पे मिल जाएगा।